Romain toujours dans la route, Fabio Aru, pourquoi pas
Romain Bardet va partir.
Allez Romain, il attaque, il passe devant Fabio Aru. Fabio Aru au bout de sa force maintenant. Et il y a Rigoberto Urán qui revient.
Ah, c'est bon pour Romain Bardet, il est en train de s'envoler dans cette victoire, regardez.
Peut-être une nouvelle victoire à Chambéry. Et Romain Bardet va aller chercher une troisième victoire française sur ce Tour de France.
Allez, belle
Peyragudes, allez Romain.
C'est bon, il est en train de tous les décrocher.
Il va aller chercher 10 secondes, il y a un petit écart. Troisième victoire sur le Tour de France pour Romain Bardet. Il n'y aura pas de bonif.
Welcome back to the Cycling Iceberg podcast, everyone. That was commentary on the Peyragudes stage of the 2017 Tour de France. Quite the stage finish. It was the first time the finish was drawn up at the airport there. And yeah, it had a double plot twist. Quite the excitement there of the French commentator. Enough reason for me to cover that. I've been up at the climb, although I must admit I wasn't riding myself. I was driving the support car for a number of friends. They were doing a longer ride, so I took their jackets, gave them some bottles, providing some support. But one thing which I noticed from the car, and you really couldn't miss it, was all the signs pointing towards the top of Peyragudes had the 007 experience. And once you're up there, it's also impossible to miss. James Bond is everywhere. The opening scene of the movie Tomorrow Never Dies is recorded up there, although you wouldn't recognize it if you've watched the movie. It's supposed to be a Russian airbase right on the Russian border. Back then, I think it's still trying to be the Soviet border, but due to the snow and the way that it's set up, you don't really recognize it compared to when you're actually looking at the airport there. Nevertheless, it's quite a spectacular sight to see planes landing and taking off there. It's quite the elevation on there, and you can see that from the TV. It's super steep. There were quite a lot of options for me to go with this episode, because today's stage will finish up there at Peyragudes. But it's a mountain time trial, the first mountain time trial in a long way. So I considered, should I do an episode about the mountain time trial? Thought it would probably be a little bit boring, and the mountain time trial I had in mind was on the Ventoux, and that climb will feature in 2 other stories later this Tour de France. Then there's the Peyragudes, the main climb that's been done many times, the extension to Peyragudes, the city itself, or the small town I should say. That also has a bit of drama between Froome and Wiggins, but eventually I settled on this. It will be the final push at the end of the time trial when the riders have already gone to the absolute limit, and its debut in 2017 was quite spectacular with a double plot twist, enough reason for me to highlight that stage. Team Sky's Chris Froome was heavily favoured to win the 2017 Tour de France. The Brit had won 3 times already, including the last 2 editions. There were however a few doubts, as his early season was subpar that year. Indeed, Froome didn't win any race prior to the Tour. In the Volta Ciclista Catalunya, he lost over 6 minutes in a hilly stage. In the Tour de Romandie, it didn't go much better. He crashed. In the Dauphiné, a race he had won before all 3 of his previous Tour wins, he lacked form and finished 4th. Still, mostly based on his reputation of always starting the Tour in prime form, Froome was the big favourite to win a 4th Tour de France title. In an interesting dynamic, Richie Porte of Team BMC was expected to be Froome's biggest challenger. From 2012 until 2015, the Australian had been a loyal lieutenant of Froome in the infamous Sky Train. Eager to have his own shot at glory in the Tour, Porte left Sky to join the American team in 2016. For that team, he finished 5th in the Tour. Porte seemed stronger than ever in 2017. He won the Tour Down Under with his trademark win on Willunga Hill, and he also won the Tour de Romandie. In the Dauphiné, he finished 2nd, but he did win the time trial. There were however also doubts around Porte. His ability to perform consistently over 3 weeks had been an issue in the past. If he wanted to have a chance to beat his former leader, he would need to avoid his traditional jour sans, which he had often been prone to. The Tour started with a prologue in Germany. It was raining in Düsseldorf, making the course slippery and very treacherous. Outsider Alejandro Valverde of Movistar crashed badly. He had to abandon with a broken kneecap. It was hard to get a real grasp of the form of the GC contenders. The conditions fluctuated over the day, and some riders simply decided to take it easy, wanting to avoid any risk in such dangerous conditions. However, what was clear was that Team Sky dominated. There was some controversy about bubbles on their skin suits, but the protest led to nothing. Sky's Geraint Thomas won the TT, and got awarded the yellow jersey. Vasil Kirienka placed 3rd, while Froome came 6th. Kwiatkowski was the 4th Sky rider in the top 10, finishing 8th. Port, on the other hand, had a disappointing start to the Tour. He finished 49th and already lost 35 seconds to Froome. With Thomas in yellow, the Tour headed towards the Vosges for the first mountain stage. Stage 5 finished on top of La Planche de Belleville. The Sky train got to work early on the climb, appearing strong as ever. However, in a surprise turn of events, it was Fabio Aru of Astana who launched a blistering acceleration with 2.5 kilometers to go. The Italian champion had remained under the radar prior to the Tour. In 2015, he'd finished 2nd in the Giro and he had won the Vuelta. But his 2016 season was disappointing, and for the 2017 Tour, most attention went out to his teammate Jakob Fuglsang. The Dane had won the Criterium du Dauphiné, but was relatively unproven over 3 weeks. He normally struggled in the high mountains, especially in the 3rd week. Aru benefited from being in the shadow. Having lost 40 seconds to Froome in the opening prologue, he didn't form an immediate threat to Sky. They didn't have an incentive to immediately close down the Italian, but at the end of the day, he was also just the strongest climber. Upon breaking away, the Italian pushed to the top in his characteristic style. He made pain faces, kept switching between seated, dancing on the pedals, then back to seated, dancing on the pedals a bit, and again another acceleration. Slowly but surely, he pulled away. In less than a kilometer, Aru had already gained 20 seconds on the other favourites. Any speculation about Thomas being a co-leader for Sky was therefore immediately put to an end. The yellow jersey needed to pull for the 3-time winner. With about 1.5 kilometers to go, Froome attacked himself. His move was however less convincing than in previous years. Typically, Froome had dominated the first mountain stage, wanting to leave no hope at all for his rivals. The first summit finish was Froome Day. This time, not. Port and a handful of riders could follow him. Aru went through and took the stage win, with Froome crossing the line in 3rd place. The Brit took the GC lead, but conceded 20 seconds to Aru, who was now 3rd in GC at 14 seconds. It was quite a spectacular win for the Italian champion. The Tour had a somewhat unusual course in 2017, because after the Vosges, the race went to the Jura for a stage that yielded no GC action. It was the goal of the organizers to go to every single mountainous area in France. So, Stage 9 visited the Northern Alps before the race would eventually head to the Pyrenees. The highlight of the 9th stage was the Horst category Mont du Chat, the top located at 25 kilometers from the finish in Chambéry. For Sky, the stage started badly. Early on, Thomas crashed very badly on a wet downhill. He had to abandon with a broken collarbone. Later on, a curious incident occurred on the Mont du Chat. Aru attacked just when Froome put his hand in the air, signaling he had a mechanical issue. It goes against the unwritten rules of the peloton to attack when the other jersey has a mechanical. The Sky domestiques were visibly frustrated to see Aru power away with several GC contenders in his wheel. But in another turn of events, Aru seemed to stop his attack after receiving instructions on the team radio. Despite footage showing Aru looking back at Froome, seeing the Brit had his hand up, the Italian insisted he didn't know Froome had a mechanical after the stage. He did apologize for his attack, but it seemed somewhat unconvincing to the general public. Having received a confidence boost from the win on La Planche de Belleville, Aru attacked again a bit further up the climb. Several riders jumped on his wheel, but then it was Port launching a counter-attack. Just 5 riders followed. Froome, agonized from the incident before, waited a bit longer. He remained calm, but launched his own attack a few kilometers from the top. His attack put Aru in difficulties. The Italian was briefly dropped, but managed to come back just before the downhill. Froome led the GC favourites down the hill at high speed. The downhill was tricky, technical and wet. In this, Port misjudged the misleading left-right corner combination and crashed hard. The Australian, who had looked so strong uphill, so strong all pre-season, saw his hopes and dreams crushed. He left the race in an ambulance. After, an intriguing battle for the stage win unfolded. In the final part of the downhill, Romain Bardet of Agi Désert broke clear of the other GC favourites. He started to chase down Warren Barguil of Sunweb, who was the lone survivor of an early breakaway. The two Frenchmen joined forces, but with 11 kilometers to go, Bardet decided the tempo was too low for him. He attacked on a super short uphill section and dropped the fatigued Barguil. He defended a 25-second lead on the GC favourites, and at 47 seconds down, he had a small chance of taking the GC lead due to 10 bonification seconds waiting at the line for the winner. It however wasn't to be for Bardet. In the chasing group, Vogelsang had come back. He worked hard for Aru, and with 2 kilometers to go, Bardet was caught. In the sprint, it was Rigoberto Urán from Cannondale who won the stage despite having a mechanical problem. His derailleur was broken, which prevented him from shifting. He beat Barguil to the line, with Froome crossing the line in third, gaining 4 bonus seconds. After 2 sprint stages, the Tour headed into the Pyrenees for a finish up at Peyragudes. This town offers an extension to the Col de Peyragudes, as said. That climb has been done in the Tour many times before. Also, as said, in 2012 a stage finished in the town of Peyragudes, but this was the first time the Tour had drawn the finish up at the airport. This added a final 500 meters of climbing at an average gradient of 13%. Sky paced up the climb, but there were no real attacks. That new finish was a real fearmonger. The steepness of that section made other riders frightened to launch an attack. Nobody wanted to be without energy, and the stage was relatively tame. However, the final minutes of the race were explosive. As soon as the riders turned onto the runway, Aru placed his attack. Froome tried to move onto the wheel, but quickly found himself fading. Aru disappeared into the distance, becoming smaller and smaller for Froome. Bardet and Urán on the wheel of Aru. Froome dropping back, not only left behind by those, but also passed by Louis Meintjes from UAE and his own domestique, Mikel Landa. In the final meters of the climb, it was Bardet who had the most left in the tank. He came around Aru and won the stage, ahead of Urán and the Italian. Aru was however happy. He took the GC lead by 6 seconds, as Froome finished 7th, losing 22 seconds in the final 400 meters. There was a real sense of excitement about this result. Many fans had grown bored by the domination of Froome and Sky. The British team had won 4 out of the last 5 tours, racing in a style most perceived as boring. They used trains uphill, with one domestique pulling after the other. By the time Froome attacked, there were normally not that many rivals left on his wheel at all. Now, their firm grip on the Tour seemed to be slipping away. Not only did Aru lead the Tour, no, Bardet at 25 seconds and Urán at 35 seconds were close by. Also, there seemed to be some internal drama within Sky, as Landa wanted his own shot at the Tour win. Things moved even closer together the next day when the Tour experimented with what they called a new format. On the French holiday, they scheduled a 100-kilometer mountain stage with finish in Foix, 25 kilometers after the final climb. It wasn't really a new format. The Tour has had smaller and shorter mountain stages before, but they called it a new experiment. And in this stage, Sky immediately put pressure on Aru. They isolated him early on. The Italian had to respond to several moves by himself, but seemed strong. When Froome attacked on the Mur de Périgueux, he didn't give an inch. The stage win was contested by a group of 4, which had escaped earlier. That group won by nearly 2 minutes, and in that group was Landa, who catapulted himself up into 4th in GC, now at 1:09. There seemed to be 5 riders that could win the Tour: Froome, Aru, Bardet, Urán and Landa. For Aru, things however quickly went downhill from there. In stage 14, he was horribly positioned for the punchy finish in Rodez. He lost 24 seconds to Froome, who retook the GC lead. Aru had the tendency to be inconsistent in third weeks, and the 2017 Tour was no exception. A minor illness certainly didn't help him either, as he lost 30 seconds on the Galibier in stage 17. He would eventually finish 5th in GC. While Aru might have dropped out of GC contention, Froome's GC lead was still slim. By no means was this over for him. On the Galibier, he had no problems following an attack of Bardet. By the end of the stage, he led Urán and Bardet by 27 seconds. The Frenchman and the Colombian had one opportunity left to try and win the Tour. Stage 18 was the final mountain stage, with a finish on the Izoard. There was still a TT remaining, which was Froome's strength. Bardet knew he had to attack and place several explosive punches to try and win the Tour. Froome got gapped a few times, but was never in real difficulties. Riding a steady pace, he managed to come back every time. When he attacked himself with 3k to go, everyone knew the Tour was pretty much over. The time trial of stage 20 commenced with Froome in the lead, 23 seconds ahead of Bardet and 29 seconds ahead of Uran. Without any mechanical issues, Froome would normally win the Tour. And indeed, the Brit had no trouble. He finished third and won his fourth Tour by a margin of 54 seconds on Uran. The time trial of Bardet was truly tragic on the other hand. He lost 2 minutes in 22 kilometers. He held on to the final podium spot by a single second over Landa. The Spaniard never really made a push for his own chances after Peyragudes. Froome later admitted he'd raced extra conservatively because he wanted to win the Vuelta that year. The 2017 Tour was by no means a great Tour. Certainly there were the storylines. Marcel Kittel was extremely dominant in the sprint, Michael Matthews had his own success, and there was this narrative which you just heard about the GC. It wasn't that close in the end, and the racing in the final week was honestly relatively underwhelming. The Alps didn't provide the spectacular racing which was hoped for, and honestly, the stage design in many of these stages kind of sucked. Nevertheless, it also had its charms. For most of his years, Froome had won the Tour relatively uncontested. Sure, in 2015 there was the final push of Quintana, but that only really materialized in the final 2 stages of the race. It had a less convincing dynamic throughout the race. In 2016, the course was different, Froome needed to try some unconventional methods, but still, his win was never really in jeopardy. And in 2017, it appeared that with Aru there was finally a contender who could take Froome on, finally a challenger who could beat him, or at the very least push him to the absolute limit. But it was just short-lived. And with that, I think there is a parallel to draw with last year's Tour de France. Back then, coming in, Pogačar was relatively favoured, mainly because of the injury that Vingegaard had early in the season. But regardless of what you feel like going into the race, after the Galibier stage, it was certain that Pogačar was favoured. However, after Vingegaard won the 11th stage to Le Lorient, coming back from dropped position, there was a sense of hope that Vingegaard could turn it around, similar to the way that people thought Aru could potentially dethrone Froome. But in both cases, that hope was short-lived, because on Plateau de Baye, Pogačar completely destroyed Vingegaard, secured his Tour win, and with that the hope was over. So in that sense, I think the storylines of those share some overlap. Again, it's not a perfect comparison, but you can see where I'm coming from, hopefully. Today, no explosive battle up on the climb like in 2017. No, it will be every man against himself and the chrono. Hopefully it will be a thrilling watch.